Good morning, everyone. I'm Sandy Gibbons. I'm both your worship associate and I'm doing it all this morning, so my pronouns are he and him. It's good to see all of you here and to welcome you to this hour of worship. We come together to share in life's meaning, grow in care and community, and open our hearts and minds to the sacred truth known by many names. Whatever your heritage, however your history, and whomever you love, you are welcome here. This space that we make sacred by our presence is where our doubts, our anger, and our pain are every bit as welcome as our certainties, our joy, and our resilience. It is the place where we come to renew our spirits in the embrace of our community and our life-affirming faith. If you're here with us for the first time, we are especially glad that you've decided to join us today. Please feel free, if you're online, to sign our virtual guest book. There's a link in the chat, and it's safe. And we would love to help support your spiritual journey. So, and if you are visiting us today, would you like to stand up and introduce yourself so that we may welcome you? Is anyone online visiting who'd like to introduce themselves? Please unmute yourself if so, and feel free to introduce. Or put a message in the chat and let us know. All right, not hearing anybody. Let's see, going once, going twice. All right. Thank you, and we welcome all of you guests who are here. I know we have some, but we offer our gratitude. Also, we offer our gratitude to everyone who've made this morning service possible. I know we have at least one announcement. I think Jenn Blosser, you wanted to give an announcement real quick?
Yay! Okay, good morning, friends of the forest. So my announcement is just to remind you that next month is our summer camp. So if you have folks 5 to 13 in your lives, or your neighbors, or your friends, or your grandkids, or anyone, and they haven't yet registered, please help spread the word. It's going to be fantastic, and I'm really looking forward to it. So I just wanted to remind everyone that that is coming up next month, starting on August 15th. Thank you.
Ein Feste Burg ist unser Gott,
Our opening words, Witnesses of the World by Tania Marquez. It is now, when we are called as witnesses of the world, to mend it, to change its course, to restore it, not to hide, not to fear, but to be bold and loud. It is now when we are called to act on our values. It is now that we are called to continue our fight for justice, to organize, to speak up. It is now. Let us gather. Let us give each other courage. Let us worship. Please join us in our opening hymn that outlines the central mission as a church. We'll build a land, number 121 in the gray hymnals. We'll build a land where we bind up the broken. We'll build a land. We light our chalice today to words by Connie Simon. This is the hour, the time has come. Mindful of our responsibilities as leaders of this faith and guardians of the living tradition, we call upon that great cloud of witnesses, those who came before, those who are here now, and those who have yet to come. We seek their presence, love, and support in this place at this hour. We kindle this flame to light their path and call them near as we undertake this sacred work. Jenn, time for all ages?
Good morning again, friends of the forest. I'm Jenn Blosser, your Director of Faith Formation. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. And I have what I imagine is a very familiar story for you all. Perhaps you have heard this before. It's a story where a little village sees something very unusual in the water flowing by along their river one day. And they look out, and in the water is a little basket. And in the basket is a baby. And they're like, whoa, that's mighty unusual. There sure is a baby floating down the river. And so they do what any good human does, right? They go out into the river, they pull the basket ashore, and they commit to taking care of this baby. They're going to love and nurture and raise this baby as one of their own. A couple days later, someone else is looking out across the water, and guess what? There's another basket floating, bobbing its way down the river, and inside the basket is yet another baby. And somebody else wades out into the water and says, okay, pulls the baby ashore. We are going to raise this baby and love it and nurture it and raise it as one of our own. And a few days later, what happens again? Another basket bobbing on down the river, and inside the basket, another baby. And the village is really proud of themselves, because every time a basket with a baby comes floating down the river, they pull that basket out and they take care of that baby. And they nurture that baby, and they raise that baby, and they care and love for that baby. Every time a baby comes floating down the river. And finally, a little girl in the village is like, excuse me, I have a question. Why are there babies floating down the river? And everyone in the village sort of looks at each other like, I don't know. But every time a baby comes down the river, don't worry, because we take care of that baby, and we raise that baby, and we love that baby, and we nurture that baby as though it were our own. And the little girl says, yeah, I know, I see that. That's awesome, and I love help taking care of all these babies, but have we ever thought of going upstream and seeing why there are babies coming down the river? Have we ever thought of going and like maybe checking out what's happening up there? And the village goes, oh, well, I mean, now that you mention it, maybe that would be a good idea. And what they find out when they go upstream is that the community further upstream is in dire straits. They're in extreme lack of resources. They're having all kinds of difficulties. And the reason that they've been sending babies down the river is that they just can't take care of them. They've been having all this problem, and it's their greatest hope that they will be found and loved. So the village council meets, and they're like, okay, what do we do? We've been taking care of the babies. We've been pulling them out of the river and taking care of them, loving them, raising them as one of our own. But is that all we need to do in this situation? Is that enough? Do we just keep taking the babies? Or is there a way that we could mobilize and help out upstream? And maybe instead of just taking care of the babies, we could help with the system that is broken in this place so that they could support their own babies and not have to send anyone downstream. So I'm going to leave you with that wondering question. Where does the village go? What does the village do? What do you think the village should do? Just help the babies that arrive? Or look at what the larger issues are and what might be at the root of this mysterious flotilla of reed baskets coming down the river? Thank you all very much. Worship enrichment link should be in the order of service, and there are packets at the back. Thank you.
Thank you, Jenn, for that lovely, if somewhat disturbing story. I suspect, unfortunately, that we will see many reed baskets floating to us and into our care over the coming years. Let us be prepared. Ours is a welcoming community where we find connection, a spiritual community where we find meaning. Ours is a community where our joys and sorrows are shared such that we might rejoice together and lament together. And we take this moment to reflect on our joys and sorrows and acknowledge the mutual support that we provide to each other. Now is the time to briefly share a joy, a sorrow, a gratitude, something that you carry deeply within your heart at this morning. Just a gentle reminder that this is not a time for church announcements. We already had those. If you're sharing for someone else, please make sure that you have their permission to do so. And please use the microphone up here, and I'll be here to help you out. For those of you on Zoom, please ask to unmute via the chat function so that you may share. You may also note in the chat that you would prefer me to share or prefer us to share what you have written. And I'm going to actually tap the tech crew to make sure that those get read out, please, since I do not have comms up here. I will start. Many ways we care for one another is through our offering to support the mission of this congregation. Our contributions allow us to serve those who are seeking a life-affirming message of love and hope. With your financial gift, we are able to offer the ministries of community care, pastoral care, and social justice. For those of you on Zoom, we have made it easy to share. There's a link in the chat for you to click and make a donation securely via credit card or to obtain our mailing address. Our website is www.uufhc.net. As always, thank you for helping us to reach all who yearn for inclusive and loving religious community.
Oh.
I saw the Lord, high and exalted, sitting on a throne, and the train of his robe filled the temple. And above him were seraphim, each with 6 wings. With 2 wings they covered their faces, with 2 they covered their feet, and with 2 they were flying. And they called to one another, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord Almighty. The whole earth is full of his glory. At the sound of their voices, the doorposts and thresholds shook, and the temple was filled with smoke. Woe is me, I cried. I am ruined, for I am a man of unclean lips, and I live among a people of unclean lips, and my eyes have seen the King, the Lord Almighty. Then one of the seraphim flew to me with a live coal in his hand, which he had taken from the tongs of the altar. With it he touched my mouth and said, See, this has touched your lips, and your guilt is taken away, and your sin atoned for. And then I heard the voice of the Lord saying, Whom shall I send? And who will go for us? And I said, Here I am. Send me. Where's my first page? Here we go. Today marks the 5th time I have spoken before this congregation, and it is once again an honor to do so. And I thought on the 5th time I've done this, it might be a good idea to review some of my previous efforts to see if I could detect a common theme within those. So in 2018, I preached on J.R.R. Tolkien, The Lord of the Rings, and the concepts of power and the perils of that power embedded therein. In 2019, I reflected on a Star Wars infused concept of resistance. In 2020, with Marla, we did a service on the evangelical UU, and in 2021, I went off the rails and talked about invasive species management as spiritual practice. And so in all of these rambles, I've managed, I think, to pull out a common theme within this, and a thread that binds these themes together. And that can be summed up as the concept of the church militant, which I hope today to extend into the Unitarian Universalist church. Now, let's just get this out of the way first. If you were to Google the phrase church militant these days, your top results will unfortunately be a truly vile right-wing website advocating implementation of a radical extremist doctrine whose core readers might be imagined reinvigorating the Spanish Inquisition. If you came this morning to hear something along those lines, this is a Wendy's. And in the use of this martial phrase, I'm also not advocating for my fellow Unitarian Universalists to take up arms, purchase tactical gear, drill in the parking lot in small unit infantry tactics, and otherwise showcase our now seemingly unbounded First Amendment or Second Amendment rights. If modern industrial martial arts constitute a key component of your own spiritual practice, I recommend our well-regulated militia, otherwise known as the National Guard. Since I began formulating the central message of this sermon, our nation seems fundamentally changed, and those who hold dear and defend oaths to this nation's founding document, those who cherish the fundamental 7 principles of our faith, and those who fall in the intersection and those in our communities at greatest risk in this nascent theocracy, we find ourselves in a war not of our choosing. So how do we frame our battle and the UU Church's role in it? Now I'm going to grasp at that concept of the church militant. It's based, and we're going to see what we can do with this today. It's based on a traditional ecclesiological metaphor. Now you're going to learn some vocabulary words today, so bear with me. But it's a traditional ecclesiological metaphor that was originally formulated in the Catholic Church. And this framing will form the core of a 3-part series of services to be delivered over the next year or so. Times TBD, stay tuned. The church is described in this metaphor as having 3 major components. Wait, we UUs don't do that whole 3 thing very well, do we? Bear with me. Those components are the church militant, the church penitent, and the church triumphant. And I'm going to explore potential Unitarian Universalist permutations of each of these in turn. But the urgency of this moment demands that we begin our explanation with the UU Church Militant. So historically, the church militant is the body of the church that is active in this world, that struggles, quote, against sin and the devil, against the rulers of the world of this darkness, against the spirits of wickedness in the high places. That's from Ephesians 6:12. And quite frankly, if that doesn't sound somewhat UU, I really don't know what is. It's kind of what we do. Struggle against the spirits of wickedness in the high places. Sounds like fun. Let's do this. And the thread, it's that thread of activity in this world that's bound my previous missives to this body. The UU Church Militant is, in short, the sum total of our activities here and now that seek to bend that arc of history toward justice, equity, and democracy in human relations. And that phrase and the entire concept then borrows unapologetically from the language of soldiery. We often hear in this same context, particularly in some of the evangelical Christian churches, and the phrase, to put on the armor of light. This phrase, it comes from Romans chapter 13, verse 12. The night is nearly over, the day is almost here, so let us put aside the deeds of darkness and put on the armor of light. Unfortunately, the previous parts of Romans chapter 13 are some of the more problematic verses regarding submission to earthly authorities, something in the UU Church that we're not particularly good at doing. But the phrase, put on the armor of light, is used to refer to the process of girding yourself for the spiritual battle, for that struggle ahead, and to don that protective shielding against the onslaughts of the world. Now, I suggest we take this image and run with it. We are the ones with the chalice, after all. Our spiritual light, symbolized by the flame that we lit earlier, protects us when we emerge from this safe space into potentially caustic social environments. And we can venture into those spaces, holding ourselves and each other in that light, knowing that our principles anchor us. They give strength, courage, and conviction, and a center that will hold in the face of a vortex of fear. So on a side note, my children and I are making some wooden shields for our ritual PVC sword combat that we do on my weekends. And I plan to paint a chalice on mine. So as we don that spiritual armor and hold out our light to the world, by the way, light in Sindarin Elvish is galad, just for your Tolkien buffs, we become the most needed superheroes of our time, the social justice warriors. And wow, do we have a battle in front of us. Today, we face seemingly innumerable crises. They are existential crises for many members of our community, for those of us members of our community LGBTQ+, for people of color, for women, and for the very concept of democracy and popular sovereignty, and for the very interdependent systems that support life on this planet as we know it. The peril for our people is immense, the risks great, the obstacles steep, and the consequences of inaction or paralysis intolerable. We must act together or we will perish together. And while the war we're fighting is not being fought with weapons on these shores, many in the world are not so fortunate and must fight the forces of unfettered oligarchic tyranny in actual trenches. Our struggle calls for a spiritual discipline that will rival the discipline that's drilled into the most effective military units. We must learn to discipline ourselves to act in some small way each and every day and in big ways on others. We will be called to confront directly the twin blasphemies of dominionism and the prosperity gospel that have infected a substantial swath of modern Christianity, morphing that wing of the faith from a faith of love and into an intolerant stew of grievance, hatred, misogyny, authoritarianism, and white supremacy. This must be done, perhaps not opposite their own houses of worship, as was suggested in a prior week, but within the halls of government that have been steadily infected by the virus of growing establishmentarianism. Go have fun looking that one up too. I encourage all those who are able and those who think themselves not able to do this to engage directly the tide of vitriol in meetings of school boards, county council meetings, local stuff, and national stuff. You don't have to be a perfect messenger. Just listen to Isaiah, whose words we heard at the beginning of this message, who doubts his own abilities, his own worthiness to get out and spread this message. So, my fellow imperfect servants of the principles, if you want to engage locally, just come to me and ask me after the service. I will point you in that right direction, and I will follow you there. Our discipline calls us publicly to engage in this struggle, and in places where it's lonely. I grew up in Denton, Texas. It's a college town, but it is in a sea of rural North Texas red. Not unlike here in Harford County, I can testify it's easy to be active in those comfortable urban areas where the body politic is largely aligned with our principles. It is much harder to do so when we find ourselves preaching into a whirlwind of invective, as voices seemingly crying in the wilderness. Yet the prophet Isaiah specifically calls out that lone voice that prepares the way, that makes a highway in the desert. Here in Harford County, we are those voices. And as we cry out from the street corners, holding our signs, advocating for the value of black lives, for reproductive rights, for overtly waging that social justice warfare, we signal to others in our communities that they do not fight alone, and that they have brothers and sisters in that fight. Our discipline will call us also to look out for those who fight beside us, to cover each other's six, to keep our heads on a swivel, looking out for each other, to monitor each other's signs of weakness, despair, of the need to rest and recover. We must not be afraid to pull ourselves out of the action when we are no longer able to fight effectively. No military unit functions without adequate rest and relaxation, R&R. And while I don't have any direct experience in such a unit, I have no direct point of comparison to military service, although my brother is a former Marine. Actually, one is never a former Marine. So my apologies for misspeaking on that. But I will recall one episode that from a personal battle of attrition known as graduate school, when I battled an experimental strategy for weeks on end without any success. And after I bargained with my own mentor, who graciously gave me a couple more months before killing that line of investigation, my next words were, "Oh yeah, by the way, I'm going on a choir tour to California next month or next week. I'll see you in a week." Boy, did I need that break. I needed to come off the line. I needed to regenerate, to recharge. And it was the best decision of my scientific career. I returned refreshed, and with a clear plan to take that hill, I did. Our discipline will also call us to make sacrifices. By now, all of us have given time, talent, or treasure to a cause that is dear to us, and in the coming days, we are likely to be called upon to decide how much additional sacrifice is possible. Many of us have already lost friends. We may lose property, and some may lose more. In any battle, there are casualties. And the UU faith has its own share of martyrs that we enshrine in our own hagiography. Michael Servetus, Norbert Kepek, James Reeb, Viola Luzzo, Toribio Quimada. You can look those up. All those gave everything in the service of their beliefs. Let us hope that none of us listening today will be called upon to give that ultimate sacrifice, but I fear that only a fool would exclude the possibility of that happening. What's more, we must recruit other soldiers to the cause. Marla and I, a couple of years ago, preached on the evangelical UU, which involves us getting out into those public spaces. The fact of the matter is that there are simply not enough of us, of the UUs, to move that needle, and there may not even at this time be enough active citizens engaged to move the needle quickly enough. We've got to get out there. We've got to recruit. We may even be called, and are likely to be called, to make common cause with people and groups with who may not align with all of our core values. But if there is enough commonality, we may be able to work in concert to achieve increments while we lead by example in the areas where we diverge. It's not going to be easy to do this, but it is necessary. And finally, no unit functions for long without accountability to each other and to our UU faith. So when I screw up, I want you to hold me accountable. If I fall and miss the mark, if I sin, to use that word, you tell me. My discipline will call me to listen. And I promise that I will do the same for you with all of the kindness and gentleness I can muster. I will expand on this topic in part 2 of the series, the UU Church Penitent. And meanwhile, we happy few, can and will face the crises before us, with heads held high and proud, with our lights flashing resplendently off of our spiritual armor, marching in an unbroken line to bring about the vision of what will be the final sermon in this series, the UU Church Triumphant. And with that, please join me in our final hymn of today's service, which shamefully appropriates the melody of perhaps the paradigmatic hymn of the Church Militant. It's number 114 in your hymnal, Forward Through the Ages.
Gifts in differing measure.
I encourage all of you to heed the call divine to coffee after the service, and thank you for coming this morning.